Hey guys, if you're not the type to plan, prep, and cook a delicious home-cooked meal, HelloFresh is just for you. You don't have to eat like a 20-year-old anymore with HelloFresh. You're going to get mouth-watering, seasonal recipes and fresh, pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your door. Their step-by-step recipes are super easy to follow, and pre-portioned ingredients help cut down on prep time. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. And they have made cooking at home fun, easy, and affordable. My family's been using HelloFresh for the past month, and the meals are amazing. Last night, we had beef tenderloin with balsamic tomatoes. Guys, it was delicious. No matter what is going on in your world, you gotta eat. So why not give HelloFresh a try? Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com. Use the promo code POGCHAEL-June16. That will get you up to 16 free meals, plus 3 surprises that will be spread out over 6 HelloFresh boxes plus free shipping. Khabib was asked his opinion. Who's going to win between Max versus Volkanovski? Now, Khabib weighed in. He was very diplomatic, but he did pick Volkanovski. And his reasoning was that Volk is staying busy. The Volk's just been in there a little bit more, that he's a little bit more comfortable. Now, hold that thought, because generally I will always side with at least to the philosophy and principle that Khabib's speaking to. I do not believe as human beings we get better at something by not doing it. And particularly in this sport, I'm right far more often than I'm wrong. But let me bring up a point to you on Max. I felt as though Max beat Volkanovski. I thought maybe he beat him the first time. I wasn't bullish on it, but I thought he beat him. The second time, I was very bullish. I thought it was 3-2. It was crystal clear, and Max should have been the champion. So if they're fighting a third time, based on what I just told you to be true, it would seem as though I'm definitely picking Max, right? Well, hold on. One thing with the Volkanovski story that's a big question mark for me going into this third fight. One thing, I apologize, with the Holloway story. Max got better in the pandemic. And if you guys will recall, he had nowhere to train. He was in Hawaii. They were very locked down, as was New Zealand. But Max goes out. He ends up in a main event. He's fighting Cater. And he tells us all that he's locked down and he's doing his own training by himself. No teammates, no coach. Oh, and by the way, he's in his garage. And he goes on and he puts on a performance that I would argue was better than any other performance he had done, not to mention the volume and the conditioning. And that's just something that you can't have if you don't train. Some guys are really good athletes, or some guys have a natural power. Like, we've all been on teams with guys who get away with stuff that's contrary to what the coach tells us, so we're all in there working really hard, but this guy gets the better results. We've all seen that to some degree. But every now and then, because it's such a cutting edge, it's such a fine line, where at certain ages in your life, you get better, you get stronger just by staying alive. You just mature and you just get better. And Max was right around that age. Max was around 26 years old at the time of the story that I'm talking about. So there is a period of Max's life where he is going to get better just by doing it. Not to mention, rest can be very helpful. Rest in short terms, not only does it repair and get your body feeling better, it'll rest your mind. It'll get you out of that grind. And these are some positives that you could get from a guy in Max Holloway who once upon a time was the best in the world, arguably the best to have ever done it. And by the way, now he's alone in his garage. So as surprising as it was, as good as he was looking, there was a little bit of a logical justification for it. Max is getting rest. It's a lot like a video game, guys. Remember when you're playing a video game and your power meter goes down, but then you get a little rest from your opponent, you're standing there and your power meter goes back up? Like, that happens in real life, but there's a cutting edge. There's a fine line, where eventually that rest and that recuperation turns into you're just being a lazy guy. I don't have any evidence of that from Max. I'm just sharing for you some of his best performances, I feel, were the 2 performances that he had during COVID when he was training in his garage by himself. So it's an interesting concept, because meanwhile, Volkanovski's over on the other side of the tracks with arguably the truest team in the history of our sport. We hear that term a lot. He represents this team, or he's with this team. But we don't have a lot of teams in MMA. They would turn on each other instantly. Contracts got drawn. They go out. They'd fight for your belt. They'd turn the gun on one another. No problem. They got a better offer somewhere else. They'll load up a U-Haul. They'll drive across the country, never look back. In MMA, for the most part, that's true. City kickboxing is a massive exception. Again, if you were to just go back to the pandemic, but I can remember reading things about how locked down New Zealand was, and a number of the guys moved into the gym. They moved into the gym so that they weren't out in public going to and fro. They all lived there. And some of those guys that were doing that were living at the gym, and I'm talking about big names from Adesanya, Dan Hooker, guys like this, didn't even have fights coming up. They were doing that because teammates had fights coming up. They needed to be bodies. They needed to be on the other side of the coin. So city kickboxing is this fascinating thing where they're all locked down. They're all getting better. We've seen that with Volkanovski's fights. We've seen that grit. We saw him dig deep in the Brian Ortega fight where he had 5 different ways to flick it. 5 different ways to get out of that night, save face, and move on to the next one. He didn't take any of them. And if you compare that with Max, who I argue for you has put on his best performances since losing the belt to Volkanovski, I think Max is better. But how did Max get better? How would an athlete actually get better? In fighting, you're not learning and you're not actually doing anything on Saturday night when the people are looking that you didn't learn 10 years ago. You're always going to get a trainer, you're always going to get a coach, and you're always going to come up with your strategy and go into your little training camp. And the second you get to the locker room the night of the fight, you throw all of it out and you revert to something that you've done 10 years ago. Mike Tyson famously said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. But it's very accurate. You're not using anything that you picked up in the last 6, 8, 10 weeks of a training camp. That's all make-believe in the coach's head. That he sat down, he figured out you're going to come outside. None of it's true. And you'll drill it and you'll warm up on it. You'll do it for 10 weeks. And when you get into that fight, you're going to turn to what you really know. So just like any rematch, guys, we have to ask ourselves the same question every time. Every single time 2 guys are getting down there to go and do a rematch, what's going to be different this time? But it's a little bit easier to answer that question. Volkanovski is meaningfully better. We also know why. We also know the repetition. We also know the rounds that he's got in. We also know the experience that he has. If you turn to Max, one of the reasons that he looks so good is he started doing something different. He did rest his mind. He did rest his body. Max was tired when he was fighting Volkanovski those first 2 times, whether Max knew it or not. When he was forced to rest, his power meter went up. So now we're left with, well, whose power meter got higher? Was the activity and the reps of Volkanovski, and that's where Khabib is favoring. Khabib was favoring in this interview, in this comment. He liked that Volk was active. He liked that he was a little bit busier than Max, which gave him a nudge over Max. Now, most times I would agree. Most times that's obvious, and we all would agree. But there are some guys with rest. There are some guys that get better at something, not by going harder, not by grinding themselves down. And I don't know where Max is at, in all fairness. The pandemic, the rules, everything has changed, and it's changed a period of time ago. He's done a full training camp for Volkanovski, as he did for the first 2 fights with Volkanovski. I'm suggesting for you that what my eyes showed me is that Max was better when he was locked in his garage by himself. Now, that can't be true forever. You got to get out there and you got to get busy at some point. You got to have somebody known as a coach over you, grinding on you, pushing on you, getting more hours, more reps, more time, more jumps of the rope. Where does Max sit? And age-wise, a lot of things are on Holloway's side. A lot of stuff that you couldn't get away with as an older or more seasoned fighter. And guys, that's what I think that the spotlight is on Jon Jones so much for with this Jon Jones experiment. When Jon Jones comes back, there will be times of his life when you could have floated gyms and you could have got kicked out and you could have got a couple weeks in Arizona here and there. I don't know if they're still true. And I only bring that to you because it would seem to me we're going to see a very different fight between Holloway and Volkanovski. And one thing that we've always favored Holloway with is his ability for pace, that he can throw more at you than your opponent. The one time that that's going to get pushed back on is with Volkanovski. Now, do those rep of Volkanovski help him? Everybody's only got so many bullets in the chamber. Volkanovski's fired a lot of those bullets since he's seen Max last. Khabib thinks that's a positive. I would share with you the other side of the coin, which is while experience and staying busy for sure is a good thing, every now and then rest is also a positive. And I think you're going to have a very different fight when we see Holloway versus Volkanovski this weekend.